In the last couple of weeks, we have covered both the American and Japanese general plans for the future, delving into the minds of important figures like General MacArthur, Admiral King, General Hyakutake, or Admiral Yamamoto. Although the American plans haven't quite gotten into motion yet, the Japanese had started their Kokoda Track campaign in the last episode, and today we're going to cover the continuation of the Japanese advance on Kokoda, as well as the resistance offered by the Maroubra Force and the plans that were brewing in Burma for future operations in the region. Your continued support allows us to expand our work, and we're so grateful for that. We're always eager to create more videos for you, and we think that you'll enjoy our documentaries on post-World War II history over on the Cold War channel, and our Wizards and Warriors channel, which focuses on the fantasy and sci-fi lore battle documentaries. We've also recently started a TikTok channel, and would appreciate your support on that new platform. Consider subscribing to all three. The links are in the description and pinned comment. Thanks for being with us. Back on July 22nd, the invasion of buna-gona as part of Operation RI had successfully concluded, with SNLF Marines completely occupying Buna, with the Yokoyama Advance Party arriving at Gona and immediately preparing to advance south towards Kokoda. During the invasion, patrols from the Papuan Battalion had observed the Japanese landings from a distance, reporting the events back to camp and to General Morris's headquarters at Port Moresby. In response, Morris quickly decided to concentrate the 39th Battalion at Kokoda, placing Lieutenant Colonel William Owen in charge of the Maroubra Force and tasking him with preventing any Japanese penetration southwest of Kokoda. If Owen failed to stop the advance of the invaders, then he was to retire to previously prepared positions on the southern terminus of the Kokoda Track. Meanwhile, Captain Sam Templeton of B Company took command of the Allied units north of Kokoda and established some defensive positions on Awala and Gorari. By the afternoon of July 23rd, Colonel Yokoyama's advance was in full swing, with his vanguard, led by Lieutenant Colonel Tsukamoto Hatsuo, reaching Awala and quickly defeating a detachment of Papuan soldiers, thus forcing them to retreat into the jungle. The rest of the Allied forces would also have to withdraw from Awala to Wairopi, with orders to only execute contact and rearguard actions while closing back on Kokoda. The next day, the situation appeared more stable, as Tsukamoto's men looked like they had spent the night at Awala, but in reality they were close behind the Papuan lookouts. Advancing with speed, the invaders fell on the unsuspecting Allied soldiers and forced them to retreat back to Gorari, where Colonel Owen had finally arrived to take command of the Maroubra Force. Many PIB soldiers deserted using the confusion. There, Owen had decided to make a stand 800 yards east of Gorari, dispersing his Australian soldiers beside the track, with some of the Papuans in the thick bush on their flanks. By midday on July 24th, the Japanese troops finally walked out of the bush track into the ambush laid by the Australians, suffering many casualties against the defenders before the Allied forces had to withdraw back to Gorari. Yet the invaders were swift and determined in their pursuit, and after a couple of hours, they had managed to engage the enemy again, successfully routing them and making them flee in despair towards Oivi. The Australians were exhausted and had also suffered many losses at this point, so Owen knew that he desperately needed some reinforcements if he hoped to hold Kokoda against the attacks of the enemy. In that regard, he asked General Morris for the aerial transportation of 2 companies towards Kokoda, but the Australians only counted with 2 aircraft at Port Moresby, so Morris was only able to fly some 30 men to reinforce the defenders by July 26th. These 30 men were immediately sent forward to Oivi, where they arrived in the afternoon, just before the start of the Japanese attack. Initially, the attackers were halted just outside of Oivi by the strength of the Australian fire, but the defenders would eventually be outflanked and would have to retreat towards their main positions on the plateau on which Oivi stood, comprising a 50-yard perimeter. During the next hours, the combatants only exchanged some desultory fire between them, with the Australians successfully managing to keep the Japanese outside of the perimeter. Despite the apparent calmness, many losses were suffered on both sides, such as Captain Templeton, who was allegedly captured and later executed by the invaders. The tale of a Japanese soldier tells that he would then be interrogated by Colonel Tsukamoto, during which the Australian laughed at his enemy and lied, stating that there were 80,000 Australians at Port Moresby. This angered Tsukamoto, who in his rage killed Templeton with his own sword. In his honour, the first point where the Kokoda Track crosses Eora Creek would be named Templeton's Crossing. With dusk falling, the Japanese at last started to encircle the tired defenders and moved in for the kill, but they were held at bay by the strong machine gun fire of the Australians. Judging that the enemy fire was high and wild, and that the Japanese vastly outnumbered them, Major William Watson decided that a withdrawal towards Deniki was their best option, so he led his forces south during the night under the cover of heavy rain. After stumbling into creeks and struggling with the bushes while being hampered by the darkness and the rainfall, the exhausted Australian forces had only managed to traverse 2 miles from Oivi by the dawn of July 27th. Meanwhile, Colonel Yokoyama was content with the progress of his vanguard, and he was also happy to find out that the road from buna-gona inland to Saputa was passable by motor vehicles without repair. Although the coastal roads were in good condition, some of his units would have to move through the jungle and occasional grasslands, something that was difficult for the Japanese due to its many rivers and steep gullies. By July 26th, however, the bulk of the advance party had rejoined the Japanese vanguard at Oivi, and they were now preparing for their final advance on Kokoda after the escape of Watson's forces. Hampered by waves of aerial attacks, Yokoyama would be forced to move by night to remain undetected by the deadly Allied bombers. At the same time, Owen had lost communications with Oivi, and, being uncertain that he could defend Kokoda with the little forces he had available, he decided to burn down the town and then withdraw to Deniki. Owen and his small group of reinforcements arrived at their destination on the morning of July 28th, where, to their surprise, they found Watson and the forces that had safely retreated from Oivi. Reinforced with Watson's men, Owen gambled that he now boasted enough forces to defend Kokoda, so he decided to retrieve the situation with haste, hurrying back to Kokoda with the bulk of the Papuan Battalion and B Company. By midday, Owen had reached the administrative area on the extreme tip of the Kokoda Plateau, deploying his forces in front of the track that led to Oivi, from where the Australians felt an attack would soon come. The 2 Port Moresby aircraft, carrying more reinforcements, circled over Kokoda during the afternoon, but the airstrip was full of barricades, and thus the pilots felt it too risky to land, and were ordered by General Morris to return back to base. Disquieting signs of Japanese movement then followed until dusk, but to the relief of the defenders, no attack came by the end of the day. During the night, however, Colonel Tsukamoto had sent forward a vanguard of around 200 soldiers, led by Captain Ogawa Tetsuo, which approached Kokoda from the east before moving towards the flanks of the Australian position. In the early hours of July 29th, the Japanese began to lay down machine gun and mortar fire upon the defenders, who had nothing to counter the mortars with, launching an emphatic attack up the steep slope of the northern end of the area. Amidst a misty moonlight, the battle saw close fighting as the Japanese charged and the Australians attempted to beat them back with grenades. While leading the men during the struggle, Owen himself was throwing down grenades when a bullet hit him above the right eye and left him very injured. Once again, Major Watson assumed command of the Australian forces, but he couldn't prevent his men from becoming separated by the heavy pressure of the invaders. The relentless Japanese soldiers soon began to infiltrate the northern positions of the defenders, as well as their flanks, slowly pushing back the Australians and forcing them to leave their injured behind, including Colonel Owen, who would later die of his wounds. Luckily for Major Watson, the same mist that had aided the Japanese in their attempts to infiltrate the Australian positions was now helping the defenders to retreat back towards Deniki. Although they had lost only a handful of men and had inflicted over 40 casualties on the enemy, including Captain Ogawa, who was killed in the final stages of the fighting, the loss of Kokoda now facilitated the Japanese overland offensive against Port Moresby. With his advance on Kokoda, Colonel Yokoyama had also been able to repair many roads and build many bridges, making motor transportation possible for 60 kilometers from the coast to Sonbo. Yet the roads west of Sonbo proved to be only suitable for pack horses, so the town of Sonbo would be stockpiled with ammunition and supplies. On Kokoda, the Japanese would also capture a large amount of grenades, machine guns and ammunition, as the defenders only carried with them what equipment they could during the withdrawal. As for the Australians under Watson, they would have a week of respite in which they would be reinforced by 3 companies of the 39th Battalion, and could also be resupplied with ammunition. Now we turn back to Burma, where new developments are unfolding as the Allies planned what their next steps would be. As we last saw, the Japanese 15th Army of General Ida, alongside their Thai allies, had completely defeated the Allies in Burma, forcing the British Burma Army to withdraw into India, and beating the Chinese Expeditionary Force of General Stilwell in a series of battles that saw some of his forces accompany him in his retreat into India, while other Chinese units had to pull back into Yunnan, where they joined Chiang Kai-shek's forces in defense of the region. After arriving in New Delhi on May 24th, Stilwell immediately set out to prepare plans for a renewed offensive in Burma. While he planned the training and re-equipping of his Chinese divisions in India, he asked General Marshall for the arrival of an American division to aid him in his offensive, aiming to retake Burma and drive the Japanese out of Thailand. He also sent a proposal to the Generalissimo for a reform of the Chinese army and for the purging of the higher-ranking Chinese officers, even suggesting the execution of those commanders who had failed him during the Burma Road campaign. On both fronts, however, Stilwell was met with opposition. General Marshall told him that the American forces were stretched thin, and that their priority was for the British to reopen the Burma Road, and the Chinese argued that they couldn't realistically undertake such reforms. During June, Stilwell also fell ill and was restricted by his jaundice from many activities, yet he was able to meet several times with Chiang to discuss the formation of a joint staff and the lend-lease of equipment and aircraft. But despite all his progress during the meetings, Washington had decided to send the 10th Air Force of General Brereton, which was stationed in India, towards the Middle East, and had also decided to halt the shipping of aircraft intended for China. Following a number of disappointments in regard to lend-lease, aviation projects, and diplomatic status, this angered the Generalissimo to such an extent that on June 29th, he presented the so-called 3 minimum demands, requesting the transportation of 3 American divisions to the Chinese theater, the formation of a 500-plane air force in China, and the monthly air shipping of 5,000 tons of supplies to China. If these 3 essential demands were not fulfilled by September, then the China theater would cease to exist by his order. Stilwell, who inherently agreed with Chiang and had requested the same things many times before, would then present the 3 demands to Washington, hoping to see them get carried out by the Americans. Yet relations between Stilwell and the Generalissimo would worsen from this point onwards, with the Chinese even asking President Roosevelt for his dismissal. In that regard, Dr. Lachlan Curry would be sent to China to discuss US-Chinese relations and reach a solution to the 3 demands, arriving there on July 20th, while the China Air Task Force would be formed, mainly consisting of the Flying Tigers of General Chennault to support Chinese air power in the region. Meanwhile, seeing that the American planners and strategists had no real plans for China, Stilwell set out to salvage the situation by convincing the British to join forces with the Chinese with the objective of liberating Burma. Shipping of lend-lease through the Hump was restricted due to the monsoons, so he needed to retake Rangoon and the Burma Road to convince his superior for an increase in the lend-lease program. Thus, on July 19th, Stilwell submitted to Chiang a plan calling for British-Chinese cooperation in regaining Burma, something that would force the hand of both Washington and the Generalissimo in regards to the lend-lease problem. This was a huge step in seeking compromise and reconciliation with Chiang and the Chinese, and this would be further aided by the efforts of Dr. Curry. On July 29th, Stilwell would broaden his plans for a Burma offensive into a whole Pacific Front offensive, calling for the recapture of Burma from Yunnan and Manipur, then continuing on towards Thailand, Indochina and Hong Kong. Pleased with this plan, and with the recent developments, the Generalissimo approved Stilwell's proposal on August 1st, and then sent Dr. Curry to present it to Washington. Furthermore, Chiang was so pleased that he would modify his 3 demands, in that 1 US division, 500 planes and 5,000 tons would be acceptable to the Chinese without specifying a deadline for fulfillment. Lastly, Stilwell would address the matter of the theater's air war, with the formulation of the China Air War Plan on September 8th, proposing that the defense of the airline and of Chongqing was to be carried out by offensive operations against hostile air concentrations, with Chennault's task force protecting the ferry line over the hump, and with the Chinese Air Force defending Chongqing and the Yangtze Valley. This plan was in direct contrast to Chennault's wishes, who wanted a more aggressive role with the destruction of Japanese aircraft, shipping, military and naval establishments, and production facilities. Stilwell instead directed him to make defense of the hump his primary mission, and although Chennault didn't completely like it, he would accept his superior's commands. Thus, by the end of September, the diplomatic crisis with China had been averted, and Stilwell was back on track for his desired Burma offensive. Next week, we'll head to the Solomon Islands, where a new and crucial offensive was beginning, and we'll also take a brief look at some of the new developments that were transpiring in the Aleutian Islands. If you don't want to miss any of our episodes, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.